The autumn rain pelted against the tall windows of Valdoria Palace as Queen Dowager Camilla Westbrook paced the length of her private study. Her silver hair was pulled back in its customary tight chignon, and her emerald eyes burned with determination. At 72, she had weathered many storms during her 40 years as queen, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The death of her son, Crown Prince Alexander, in a tragic riding accident 6 months earlier, had left the kingdom in mourning and the royal succession in question. His widow, Princess Charlotte, had been devastated by the loss, and their 8-year-old daughter, Princess Elena, had become withdrawn and troubled since her father's death. What troubled Camilla most, however, were the whispers she'd been hearing about Charlotte's state of mind. Lady Margaret Thornfield, Camilla's most trusted advisor and oldest friend, sat quietly in the corner, watching the Queen Dowager with concern. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "perhaps we should discuss this matter more carefully before taking such drastic action." Camilla stopped pacing and turned to face her friend. "Margaret, I've made my decision. Charlotte is unfit to care for Elena. The child needs stability, guidance, and proper royal education. She needs someone who understands the weight of the crown she may one day inherit." The door to the study opened, and Captain James Hartwell, head of the Royal Guard, entered with his usual measured stride. At 45, James had served the royal family for 20 years, rising through the ranks due to his unwavering loyalty and sharp instincts. His dark hair showed traces of gray at the temples, and his steel blue eyes reflected the gravity of his position. "Your Majesty," James said, bowing respectfully, "you requested to see me." Camilla nodded curtly. "James, I need you to understand something of utmost importance. I am formally requesting custody of my granddaughter, Princess Elena. The legal proceedings will begin tomorrow, but I want to ensure that Elena's transition to my care goes smoothly when the time comes." James felt his stomach tighten. He had witnessed Charlotte's grief firsthand, had seen her struggle to be both mother and father to young Elena while dealing with her own profound loss. While it was true that Charlotte had been having difficulties, James knew her heart was pure and her love for her daughter absolute. "Your Majesty," James said carefully, "with all due respect, Princess Charlotte is devoted to Elena. Perhaps there might be other ways to provide support during this difficult time." Camilla's eyes flashed dangerously. "Captain Hartwell, I am not asking for your opinion on family matters. I am informing you of a decision that has already been made. When the courts award me custody, I expect your full cooperation in ensuring Elena's safety and well-being under my guardianship." James had always prided himself on his loyalty to the crown, but this felt different. This felt wrong. He thought of Elena's bright smile, how she would light up whenever her mother read her stories in the palace gardens, how Charlotte would sing ancient Valdorian lullabies to help the child sleep when nightmares about her father plagued her dreams. "Your Majesty," James said, his voice steady but firm, "I serve the crown and the royal family. That includes Princess Charlotte and Princess Elena. I cannot support any action that might cause unnecessary harm to either of them." The silence that followed was deafening. Lady Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her chair, while Camilla's face grew pale with rage. Never in her 40 years of rule had anyone, especially not a member of her own guard, spoken to her with such defiance. "How dare you question my judgment?" Camilla said, her voice low and dangerous. "I am thinking of what is best for Elena's future. Charlotte has become unstable, unpredictable. Just last week she was found crying in the palace chapel at 3 a.m, talking to Alexander's portrait, as if he were still alive. James felt his heart break at the image, but his resolve only strengthened. "Grief affects people differently, Your Majesty. Princess Charlotte is a loving mother who has suffered an unimaginable loss. Given time and proper support, she will recover." "Time?" Camilla laughed bitterly. "Elena doesn't have time. Every day she spends with Charlotte, she becomes more withdrawn, more troubled. The child barely speaks anymore. James, she needs structure, discipline, and guidance that only I can provide." What Camilla didn't mention were the other concerns that had been weighing on her mind. Charlotte had been asking uncomfortable questions about Alexander's death, questions that could potentially embarrass the royal family if pursued. The accident had occurred during a private ride on the palace grounds, and while the official investigation had concluded it was purely accidental, Charlotte's persistent inquiries had begun to attract unwanted attention from the press. James stood straighter, his military bearing evident in every line of his body. "Your Majesty, I respectfully disagree. Princess Elena needs her mother now more than ever. Taking her away from Charlotte would be devastating for both of them." Camilla stepped closer to James, her eyes blazing with fury. "Captain Hartwell, you forget yourself. I am not some common grandmother seeking to interfere in family matters. I am the Queen Dowager of Valdoria, and I know what is best for the future of this kingdom. Elena is third in line to the throne after her uncle Frederick and his son. Her education and upbringing cannot be left to chance." The mention of Prince Frederick caused James to frown slightly. Alexander's younger brother had always been ambitious, and rumors about his satisfaction with his newfound position as heir had been circulating throughout the palace. James wondered if Frederick's influence had played a role in Camilla's sudden determination to gain custody of Elena. "Your Majesty," James said, "I have served this family faithfully for 20 years. I watched Prince Alexander grow up, and I've seen the love and care Princess Charlotte provides for Elena. I cannot in good conscience support separating a child from her mother without compelling evidence that the child is truly in danger." Lady Margaret finally spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. "Perhaps, Your Majesty, Captain Hartwell raises valid points. The public perception of such an action could be quite damaging to the royal family's reputation." Camilla whirled around to face her advisor. "The public will understand that I am acting in the best interests of my granddaughter. They will see that I am ensuring Elena receives the proper royal education she deserves." James watched the exchange with growing unease. He had known the Queen Dowager for many years and had always respected her wisdom and strength. But something about this situation felt orchestrated, as if there were forces at work beyond a grandmother's concern for her granddaughter's welfare. "Your Majesty," James said, "if you truly believe Princess Charlotte is unfit to care for Elena, perhaps the family could work together to provide additional support, rather than pursuing such drastic legal action. Surely there are other options that would keep mother and daughter together." Camilla's patience finally snapped completely. "Enough. I will not have my decisions questioned by someone who clearly doesn't understand the complexities of royal responsibility. Captain Hartwell, you will support my decision or you will find yourself reassigned to duties far from this palace." The threat hung heavy in the air. James knew that his position, his career, and his ability to protect the royal family all depended on Camilla's favor. But as he thought of 8-year-old Elena, already traumatized by her father's death, potentially being torn away from the only parent she had left, he knew he couldn't remain silent. "Your Majesty," James said quietly, "with all due respect, I cannot support an action that I believe would harm Princess Elena or Princess Charlotte. If that means reassignment, then so be it." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the study. Lady Margaret gasped softly, while Camilla stared at James with a mixture of shock and fury. Never in her long reign had anyone defied her so directly, especially not someone whose loyalty she had taken for granted. Outside, the storm continued to rage, mirroring the tempest that had just erupted within the palace walls. James knew that his words would have consequences, but he also knew that some principles were worth defending, regardless of the cost. As he stood waiting for Camilla's response, James couldn't help but think about the little girl at the center of this brewing storm, innocently unaware that her future was being decided by adults who claimed to love her, but seemed incapable of putting her true needs first. The news of James Hartwell's defiance spread through the palace corridors like wildfire, though in whispers and careful glances rather than open discussion. Within hours of his confrontation with Queen Dowager Camilla, every member of the royal staff knew that the most trusted member of the guard had refused to support Her Majesty's custody petition. Princess Charlotte sat in the small sitting room adjacent to her daughter's bedroom, watching Elena color quietly at her child-sized table. The 8-year-old had chosen to draw horses again, just as she had every day since her father's accident. Each drawing featured a magnificent stallion, always alone, always standing in what appeared to be an endless field. Charlotte's heart ached as she recognized the symbolism her daughter was unconsciously expressing. "Mama," Elena said softly without looking up from her drawing, "will Papa's horse ever stop being sad?" Charlotte felt tears threaten to spill over, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "I think Papa's horse misses him very much, sweetheart. But maybe someday, the horse will remember all the happy times they had together, and that will help." Elena nodded solemnly and continued coloring. Her platinum blonde hair fell in gentle waves around her face, and her green eyes, so much like her late father's, remained focused on her artwork. She had been such a vibrant, chatty child before Alexander's death, but now she seemed to exist in her own quiet world, emerging only when absolutely necessary. A soft knock at the door interrupted Charlotte's thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Elena's nanny or perhaps one of the housekeeping staff. Instead, Captain James Hartwell stepped into the room, his usual confident demeanor somewhat subdued. He bowed respectfully to Charlotte and offered a gentle smile to Elena, who looked up from her coloring and gave him a small wave. "Uncle James!" Elena said, using the honorary title she had given him years ago. "Do you want to see my drawing?" "I would love to, Princess," James replied, walking over to kneel beside her table. "This is beautiful work. You're becoming quite the artist." Elena beamed at the praise, the first genuine smile Charlotte had seen from her daughter in days. "Papa used to say I could draw anything if I practiced enough. He said artists could make people feel happy even when they were sad." James felt his heart clench at the child's innocent words. "Your papa was a very wise man, Princess Elena, and he was absolutely right about your talent." Charlotte gestured toward the window seat, indicating that James should join her while Elena continued her drawing. As they moved away from the child's table, Charlotte's expression grew concerned. "James, you look troubled. Is everything all right?" Charlotte asked in a low voice. James glanced toward Elena, who was once again absorbed in her artwork, then back to Charlotte. "Your Highness, I need to speak with you about a matter of great importance. Perhaps we could talk privately?" Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. "Elena, darling, would you like to go find Nanny Margaret? I think she was planning to read that new storybook in the library." Elena looked up eagerly. "The one about the princess who befriends a dragon?" "That's the one," Charlotte smiled. "James and I need to have a grown-up conversation, but I'll come find you in a little while." After Elena had skipped out of the room, her drawing forgotten for the moment, Charlotte turned back to James with growing apprehension. "What's happened?" James took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to tell her would shatter the relative peace Charlotte had been trying to maintain. "Your Highness, Queen Dowager Camilla has informed me that she intends to pursue legal custody of Princess Elena." The color drained from Charlotte's face, and she sank onto the window seat as if her legs could no longer support her. "What did you say?" "She believes that Elena would benefit from her direct care and supervision. She's concerned about your ability to provide proper guidance during this difficult time," James explained gently. Charlotte stared at him in stunned silence for several long moments before anger began to replace shock. "My ability? James, Elena is my daughter. She's all I have left of Alexander. How could Camilla even consider such a thing? I don't believe her concerns are entirely without merit from her perspective," James said carefully. "You have been struggling, which is completely understandable given what you've endured. But I told Her Majesty that separating Elena from you would be devastating for both of you." "You told her that?" Charlotte asked, surprise evident in her voice. "I did, and I told her that I could not support such an action." James's jaw tightened. She was not pleased with my response. Charlotte studied James's face, seeing the tension and concern etched in his features. "What does this mean for you?" "That's not important right now," James replied. "What matters is protecting Elena and ensuring that she remains with her mother where she belongs." Tears began to flow down Charlotte's cheeks as the full implications of the situation hit her. "James, I know I haven't been at my best lately. Losing Alexander, it feels like losing half of myself. But Elena needs me. I'm trying so hard to be strong for her." "I know you are, Your Highness. And anyone who truly cares about Elena's welfare can see how much you love her." James leaned forward slightly. "But we need to be strategic about how we handle this situation. Queen Dowager Camilla has considerable influence and resources at her disposal." Charlotte wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, a spark of her old determination beginning to return. "What do you suggest?" "First, you should speak with the Royal Legal Council immediately. Understand exactly what Camilla can and cannot do legally. Second, we need to document Elena's current well-being and your relationship with her. Third, you might consider seeking support from other family members who could advocate on your behalf." At the mention of other family members, Charlotte's expression grew complicated. Frederick has been distant since Alexander's death. I think he's uncomfortable around Elena and me. We're living reminders of the brother he lost and the position he never wanted to inherit." James nodded knowingly. Prince Frederick had indeed seemed eager to distance himself from the painful reminders of his brother's death. Some in the palace whispered that he was relieved to be next in line for the throne, though James had never seen direct evidence to support such claims. "What about Princess Marie?" James suggested, referring to Alexander's younger sister who lived in the neighboring kingdom of Astoria with her diplomat husband. "Marie would help if she could, but she's 7 months pregnant and can't travel. Her husband has forbidden any stress during these final months." Charlotte sighed deeply. "I feel so alone in this, James. Alexander always said that family should protect each other, but it seems like everyone is more concerned with protecting themselves." James felt a surge of protectiveness toward both Charlotte and Elena. Over the years, he had watched this small family weather various storms, and he had developed genuine affection for all of them. The thought of Elena being removed from Charlotte's care struck him as not only wrong but potentially devastating for the child. "Your Highness, you're not alone in this. There are people in the palace who care about Elena's true welfare, but you need to be prepared for a difficult fight. Queen Dowager Camilla is not someone who changes her mind easily once she's made a decision." Charlotte stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the palace gardens where Elena often played. "James, can I ask you something in complete confidence?" "Of course, Your Highness." "Do you think there's more to this than Camilla's stated concerns? I've noticed that she's been asking a lot of questions about my conversations with the investigators after Alexander's accident. She seems particularly interested in whether I've been in contact with any journalists." James felt his pulse quicken. "Have you been speaking with journalists?" "Not intentionally, but I have been asking questions about the accident. Some things just don't make sense to me. Alexander was an experienced rider, and Thunderbolt was one of the most reliable horses in the royal stable. The idea that he would suddenly bolt and throw Alexander," Charlotte shook her head. "It just doesn't feel right. This was dangerous territory, and James knew it." The official investigation had concluded that Prince Alexander's death was a tragic accident, and any suggestion otherwise could create a scandal that would rock the entire kingdom. "Your Highness, I understand your need for answers, but you must be very careful about pursuing unofficial investigations. Such inquiries could be misinterpreted, and they might be seen as questioning the competency of the royal investigators." Charlotte turned back to face him, and James saw a determination in her eyes that reminded him strongly of her late husband. "James, what if Camilla is trying to gain custody of Elena not because she's concerned about my parenting, but because she's worried about what I might discover about Alexander's death?" The suggestion hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. James had always prided himself on his loyalty to the crown, but he was beginning to realize that loyalty might require him to question some of the very people he had sworn to protect.
"Your Highness, that's a very serious accusation."
"Do you have any evidence to support such a theory?" "Nothing concrete," Charlotte admitted. "Just intuition and the timing of everything. Alexander dies under mysterious circumstances, I start asking questions, and suddenly Camilla decides I'm unfit to care for my own daughter." James considered this carefully. While conspiracy theories were dangerous and often unfounded, his years of experience had taught him to pay attention to patterns and timing. The convergence of events Charlotte had described was certainly suspicious. If you truly believe there's more to Alexander's death than has been revealed, you need to be extremely careful about how you proceed. Any investigation would need to be handled with the utmost discretion. Charlotte nodded. "I know. But James, I can't let them take Elena from me. She's not just my daughter. She's Alexander's legacy. If something really did happen to him, if it wasn't an accident, then Elena might be in danger too." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of running footsteps in the corridor, followed by Elena's voice calling for her mother. Charlotte quickly composed herself as the door burst open and Elena rushed in, her face flushed with excitement. "Mama! Nanny Margaret says there's going to be a special dinner tonight, and I get to wear my blue dress with the sparkly buttons." Charlotte forced a smile and knelt down to embrace her daughter. "That sounds wonderful, darling. Did you finish listening to the story about the princess and the dragon?" "Yes, and the dragon wasn't scary at all. He was just lonely and needed a friend." The princess was very brave to talk to him when everyone else was afraid. As James watched the tender interaction between mother and daughter, he felt his resolve strengthen. Whatever was happening in the palace, whatever forces were at work, he would not stand by and watch this family be destroyed. Elena deserved to remain with her mother, and Charlotte deserved support during the most difficult period of her life. But as he prepared to leave them to their evening, James couldn't shake the feeling that Charlotte's suspicions about Alexander's death might be more than just the desperate theories of a grieving widow. And if that were true, then the custody battle might be just the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous conflict that could threaten the very foundations of the Valdorian monarchy. The royal legal chambers had never felt more imposing than they did on the cold morning when Charlotte arrived for her first meeting with Sir Edmund Blackwell, the kingdom's most respected family law advocate. The mahogany-paneled walls seemed to close in around her as she sat across from the elderly barrister, whose silver-rimmed spectacles reflected the pale autumn light filtering through the tall windows. "Your Highness," Sir Edmund began, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years of legal experience, "I must be frank with you about the challenges we face. Queen Dowager Camilla has filed a petition claiming that circumstances have made it necessary for her to assume guardianship of Princess Elena in the best interests of the child and the crown." Charlotte felt her hands tremble slightly as she clasped them in her lap. "What exactly is she claiming, Sir Edmund?" "The petition cites concerns about your emotional stability following Prince Alexander's death, questions about your ability to provide proper royal education and guidance, and suggestions that Elena's development has suffered under current circumstances." Sir Edmund removed his spectacles and cleaned them carefully before continuing. "She's also raising concerns about your recent inquiries regarding the circumstances of your husband's death." The last point hit Charlotte like a physical blow. "So this is about silencing me." "Your Highness, I strongly advise against framing this situation in those terms, particularly in any public forum. Such suggestions could be seen as inflammatory and might actually harm your case." Sir Edmund leaned forward slightly. "However, I will say that the timing of this custody petition, combined with the specific concerns raised, does present an unusual pattern." Charlotte stood and walked to the window, her mind racing. "Sir Edmund, what are my chances of retaining custody of Elena? Queen Dowager Camilla has significant influence within the royal court system, substantial resources, and a strong argument regarding royal protocol and Elena's future responsibilities as a potential heir to the throne." He paused. "However, family courts generally favor keeping children with their biological parents unless there's clear evidence of unfitness or danger." "And do you believe there's such evidence?" Sir Edmund was quiet for a long moment. "Your Highness, you have been through tremendous trauma. It would be understandable if you were struggling with depression, anxiety, or other emotional challenges. The question is whether such struggles, if they exist, genuinely interfere with your ability to care for Elena." Charlotte turned back to face him. "I won't pretend that I haven't been devastated by Alexander's death. But Elena is my reason for getting up each morning. She's my motivation to keep going when everything else feels meaningless. How could anyone argue that separating us would benefit her? Would many of them need stability, structure, and preparation for her royal duties? That might be difficult to provide while you're grieving. She would emphasize her own experience in raising future monarchs and her ability to provide Elena with resources and education that you cannot." The door to the legal chambers opened quietly, and Charlotte was surprised to see Captain James Hartwell enter, followed by a woman she didn't immediately recognize. "Your Highness, Sir Edmund," James said, bowing respectfully. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe you should meet Dr. Nikoski, Sarah Mitchell. She's a child psychologist who has some important insights regarding Princess Elena's current state of mind." Dr. Mitchell was a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair that she wore in a simple bun. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult situations involving children and families. "Your Highness." "Dr. Mitchell said, offering a respectful curtsy. "Captain Hartwell contacted me because he was concerned about Princess Elena's welfare during this difficult time. I've taken the liberty of conducting some informal observations of Elena's behavior and interactions over the past few days." Charlotte felt a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "What have you observed, Dr. Mitchell?" "Princess Elena is indeed showing signs of grief and trauma, which is entirely normal and expected given her loss. However, I've also observed her interactions with you, and what I see is a child who draws comfort, security, and stability from her mother's presence. Dr. Mitchell opened a small notebook. Yesterday, I watched Elena become distressed when she couldn't immediately locate you in the palace. When she found you in the library, her relief was immediate and profound. This suggests a healthy attachment relationship. Sir Edmund leaned forward with interest. Dr. Mitchell, would you be willing to provide expert testimony regarding Elena's psychological well-being and her relationship with her mother? I would, though I should note that Queen Dowager Camilla has also retained a child psychologist, Dr. Philip Carrington, who will likely present a different perspective. Charlotte felt her heart sink. What kind of different perspective? Carrington is well known for emphasizing the importance of structure and stability in child rearing, particularly for children with significant future responsibilities. He would likely argue that Elena requires more rigid guidance than might be possible in a household affected by grief and emotional upheaval. James, who had been standing quietly near the door, stepped forward. Dr. Mitchell, what would you say about the impact on Elena if she were separated from her mother at this time? In my professional opinion, removing Elena from her mother's care right now would be potentially devastating. Children who lose one parent often become intensely attached to the surviving parent as their primary source of security. Disrupting that attachment during the grief process could cause long-term psychological damage. Charlotte felt tears of relief beginning to form. Finally, someone was speaking about Elena's actual needs rather than royal protocols and political considerations. However, Dr. Mitchell continued, I must also note that Queen Dowager Camilla's concerns about Elena's development aren't entirely without merit. The child has become increasingly withdrawn and shows signs of anxiety and depression. She would benefit greatly from professional counseling and additional support. What kind of support? Charlotte asked. Grief counseling for both of you, together and separately. Perhaps some activities that might help Elena reconnect with her interests and social relationships. And definitely some strategies for helping her process her father's death in age-appropriate ways. Sir Edmund made notes as Dr. Mitchell spoke. This is very helpful. Dr. Mitchell, would you be willing to develop a comprehensive plan for supporting Elena's psychological well-being while she remains in her mother's care? Absolutely. In fact, I think such a plan would demonstrate Princess Charlotte's commitment to Elena's welfare and her willingness to seek appropriate help when needed. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Before anyone could respond, Lady Margaret Thornfield entered, her usual composed demeanor noticeably shaken. Your Highness, Lady Margaret said, addressing Charlotte with unusual formality. I apologize for the intrusion, but there's been a development that you need to know about immediately. Charlotte felt her stomach drop. What's happened? Queen Dowager Camilla has moved to expedite the custody proceedings. She's filed an emergency petition claiming that Elena is in immediate danger and should be removed from your care while the full custody hearing is pending. The room fell silent except for the sound of Sir Edmund's sharp intake of breath. On what grounds? He asked. Lady Margaret glanced around the room nervously before continuing. She's claiming that your recent behavior has become increasingly erratic and potentially dangerous to Elena's welfare. Specifically, she's citing your conversations with Captain Hartwell about investigating Prince Alexander's death as evidence of paranoid thinking that could affect your judgment regarding Elena's safety. James felt his blood run cold. She's using my reports against Princess Charlotte? I'm afraid so. She's also claiming that your refusal to support her custody petition demonstrates that you've been unduly influenced by Princess Charlotte's unstable mental state. The magnitude of the situation finally hitting her fully. She's painting me as mentally unfit, and James as somehow compromised. How do we fight that? Dr. Mitchell spoke up firmly. We fight it with facts and professional assessment. Your Highness, would you be willing to undergo a comprehensive psychological evaluation by an independent expert? Of course, Charlotte replied without hesitation. And we document everything. Sir Edmund added, every interaction Elena has, every sign of her emotional well-being, every demonstration of the strong bond between mother and daughter. We also need to be very careful about how we handle the questions regarding Prince Alexander's death. James had been listening to the conversation with growing concern, but now he stepped forward with determination. there's something else we need to consider. What if Princess Charlotte's concerns about her husband's death aren't the product of grief-induced paranoia? What if there really are questions that deserve answers? Lady Margaret looked startled. Captain Hartwell, surely you're not suggesting. I'm suggesting that dismissing Princess Charlotte's concerns without investigation might be exactly what someone wants us to do. And if that's the case, then this custody battle might be about much more than Elena's welfare. The implications of James's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. If there really was something suspicious about Prince Alexander's death, then the stakes of this custody battle were higher than anyone had imagined. Charlotte looked around at the faces of the people who had gathered to help her. Sir Edmund with his legal expertise, Dr. Mitchell with her understanding of child welfare, James with his unwavering loyalty, and even Lady Margaret, who despite her position with Queen Dowager Camilla seemed genuinely concerned about Elena's well-being. Then we need to be very strategic about how we proceed, Charlotte said, her voice gaining strength. We need to protect Elena, preserve my rights as her mother, and find the truth about Alexander's death. And we need to do all of that while Queen Dowager Camilla tries to use the system against us. Sir Edmund nodded grimly. Your Highness, this is going to be the fight of your life. Are you prepared for what that might entail? Charlotte thought of Elena's sweet face, of the drawings of lonely horses, of the way her daughter still sometimes called for her papa in her sleep. She thought of Alexander and the love they had shared, the family they had built, and the promises they had made to always protect their daughter. I'm prepared for whatever it takes, she said firmly. Elena is my daughter, and no one is going to take her away from me without the fight of their lives. As the group began planning their strategy, none of them noticed the figure who had been listening at the slightly open door, or the way that person slipped away quietly to report what they had heard to very interested parties elsewhere in the palace. The battle for Elena's future was just beginning, and the forces arrayed on both sides were more complex and dangerous than anyone yet realized. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for the following week, but the palace had already divided into warring camps. Servants whispered in corners about whose side they supported, while senior staff members found themselves carefully navigating conversations that could determine their future employment. The tension was so thick it seemed to permeate the very stones of the ancient castle. Princess Elena, oblivious to the legal machinations swirling around her, had noticed that something was wrong. Her mother seemed constantly worried. There were more hushed conversations than usual, and several people she loved appeared to be avoiding each other. The 8-year-old had developed the habit of listening at doors, trying to understand why the adults in her life seemed so upset. On Tuesday evening, Elena crept out of her bedroom after her nanny had settled her for the night. She had heard voices coming from her mother's private sitting room and wanted to know if they were talking about her papa again. As she approached the slightly open door, she could hear her mother speaking with Uncle James and a lady she didn't recognize. Dr. D.C.O.M.M.M.A. Lady C.O.M. Mitchell, I appreciate everything you're doing to help us, Charlotte was saying, but I'm terrified that it won't be enough. Camilla has resources and influence that I can't match. Your Highness, the psychological evaluation results strongly support your fitness as a mother. Elena shows no signs of abuse, neglect, or inappropriate care. In fact, her attachment to you is healthy and strong. Helena pressed closer to the door, confused by the big words but understanding that they were talking about whether she could stay with her mama. The thought of being separated from her mother made her stomach feel funny and scared. James's voice was next. The problem is that Queen Dowager Camilla isn't just arguing about Elena's current care. She's building a case about Elena's future needs as a potential heir to the throne. She's arguing that Elena needs royal education and protocol training that Charlotte can't provide while dealing with grief. But that's not fair! Elena wanted to shout, though she remained hidden. Her mama taught her about being a princess every day. They practiced curtsying and proper manners, and Mama always explained why certain behaviors were expected of royal family members. Dr. Mitchell's voice was gentle but concerned. There's another issue we need to discuss. Elena has been exhibiting some behaviors that suggest she's aware of the conflict. Yesterday, I observed her playing with her dolls in a way that mirrored custody disputes. She had one doll trying to take a baby doll away from another doll. Elena felt her cheeks get hot. She hadn't realized that anyone was watching her play. She often acted out stories with her dolls, and lately, those stories had involved families being separated and children being scared. "Is she asking questions about what's happening?" Charlotte asked with obvious worry. "Not directly, but she's clearly picking up on the tension. Children her age often blame themselves when adults around them are upset. We need to consider having an age-appropriate conversation with her about the situation." Elena's eyes widened. They were going to tell her what was happening, part of her wanted to know, but another part of her was terrified of what she might learn. James spoke up again. "There's something else we need to discuss. I've been doing some discreet inquiries about Prince Alexander's accident, and I've discovered some inconsistencies in the official reports." Elena's breath caught. They were talking about Papa's accident. She had so many questions about what had happened, but every time she tried to ask, the adults would change the subject or tell her she was too young to understand. "What kind of inconsistencies?" Charlotte asked, her voice sharp with interest. "The stable master, Thomas Bradley, has been acting strangely since the accident. He's avoided talking to me directly, and when I finally cornered him yesterday, he seemed nervous and evasive. He mentioned something about irregularities in the equipment, but wouldn't elaborate." Mitchell sounded concerned. "James, if you're right about there being more to Prince Alexander's death, then Elena could indeed be in danger, not from her mother, but from whoever might have been responsible for her father's death." Elena felt the world spinning around her. Papa's death might not have been an accident? Someone might have hurt him on purpose? And now that same someone might want to hurt her? "That's exactly what I'm worried about," Charlotte said, her voice trembling. "If Camilla succeeds in gaining custody of Elena, she'll be taking her away from the people who truly want to protect her." "But surely Queen Dowager Camilla wouldn't put Elena in danger," Dr. Mitchell protested. "Not intentionally," James replied grimly. "But if she's more concerned about protecting the royal family's reputation than uncovering the truth about Alexander's death, she might inadvertently be putting Elena in the hands of the very people who pose a threat." Elena had heard enough. Her 8-year-old mind couldn't fully process all the implications of what she'd learned, but she understood that her mama was in trouble, and that someone might have hurt her papa. She also understood that some people wanted to take her away from her mama, and that thought terrified her more than anything else. As quietly as she could, Elena crept back to her bedroom, her mind racing with frightening possibilities. Instead of getting back into bed, she went to her small desk and pulled out paper and crayons. If the adults were planning to tell her about the situation, she wanted to be ready with questions. And maybe, she thought with the determined logic of a child, she could help them figure out how to keep her family together. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Queen Dowager Camilla sat in her private office with Prince Frederick and Dr. Bauer, Philip Carrington, the child psychologist who was supporting her custody petition. "Carrington, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation," Camilla said, her voice carrying the authority of decades of rule. "Princess Elena is not just any child. She is third in line to the throne, and her education and upbringing will affect the future of this kingdom." Dr. Carrington, a thin man with sharp features and an air of professional confidence, nodded seriously. "Your Majesty, I completely agree. My evaluation clearly shows that Princess Elena requires more structure and stability than her current environment provides. The child shows signs of anxiety and withdrawal that could become permanent if not addressed properly." Prince Frederick, who had been quietly reviewing documents, looked up with concern. "Dr. Carrington, are you saying that Elena is being harmed by remaining with Charlotte?" "Not harmed in the traditional sense, Your Royal Highness, but certainly not receiving the care and guidance appropriate for a child of her station. Princess Charlotte, while undoubtedly loving, is too consumed with grief to provide the firm guidance and royal education that Princess Elena requires." Camilla leaned forward intently. "And what about Charlotte's recent behavior regarding my son's death, her persistent questioning and conspiracy theories? That's particularly concerning." "Doctor," Carrington replied, "such thinking patterns suggest a disconnection from reality that could indeed affect her parenting judgment. A child exposed to such thinking might develop anxiety disorders or difficulty distinguishing between reality and unfounded speculation." Prince Frederick shifted uncomfortably. "Mother, I have to ask, are Charlotte's questions really so unreasonable? Alexander was an excellent horseman, and the circumstances of his death were rather unusual. Frederick, your brother's death was thoroughly investigated by the proper authorities. Charlotte's refusal to accept their findings is evidence of her inability to cope with reality. That kind of thinking could be very damaging to Elena's emotional development. What none of them knew was that Thomas Bradley, the stable master, had been struggling with his conscience for months. The equipment irregularities he had mentioned to James were more significant than he had indicated. Thomas had discovered the evidence after the accident, but had been convinced by certain palace officials that revealing this information would only cause more pain for the royal family. Now, with the custody battle intensifying, and knowing that innocent Elena might be caught in the middle of something much larger and more dangerous than a family dispute, Thomas was beginning to reconsider his silence. As he sat in his small quarters above the royal stables, Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he had been carrying around for weeks but had never used. Sir Edmund Blackwell? This is Thomas Bradley, the royal stable master. I need to speak with you about Prince Alexander's accident. There are things you need to know before the custody hearing. The call lasted nearly an hour, and by the time it ended, the legal battle over Elena's custody had transformed into something much more complex and dangerous. The truth about Prince Alexander's death was about to emerge, and when it did, it would threaten not just the custody case, but the very stability of the Valdorian royal family. As Thomas hung up the phone, he couldn't help but think about little Princess Elena, innocently caught in the middle of adult conflicts she couldn't understand. Whatever happened next, he was determined to ensure that the truth would finally be told, regardless of the consequences for himself or anyone else involved. The stage was now set for revelations that would shake the kingdom to its core, and Elena's future would depend on whether the adults who claimed to love her could put her welfare above their own interests and fears. Part 5. The emergency custody hearing convened on a gray Thursday morning in the royal family's private court chamber, a room that had witnessed centuries of dynastic disputes but rarely one involving such personal stakes. Judge Victoria Ashworth, a stern woman in her 60s who had presided over royal legal matters for over 20 years, called the session to order as the opposing sides took their positions. Queen Dowager Camilla sat with her legal team, her posture regal and composed, every inch the picture of royal authority. Across the chamber, Princess Charlotte appeared pale but determined, flanked by Sir Edmund Blackwell and Dr. Mitchell. Captain James Hartwell sat in the gallery, his presence a silent show of support despite the professional risks he was taking. Before we begin formal proceedings, Judge Ashworth announced, "I must inform all parties that new evidence has come to light that may materially affect this case. Mr. Thomas Bradley, the royal stable master, has requested to present testimony relevant to both the custody petition and the circumstances surrounding Prince Alexander's death." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Queen Dowager Camilla's face remained impassive, but those who knew her well could see the tension in her shoulders.
Ah!
Prince Frederick, seated behind his mother, looked genuinely surprised and concerned. Thomas Bradley entered the chamber, his weathered face showing the strain of months of internal conflict. He had served the royal family for 30 years, and testifying against their interests went against every instinct he possessed. But the thought of young Elena being used as a pawn in a larger game had finally overcome his reluctance to speak. "Mr. Bradley," Judge Ashworth said formally, "you understand the serious nature of your request to present evidence in this matter?" "I do." Thomas's voice was steady despite his obvious nervousness. "What I have to say affects both Princess Elena's safety and the truth about her father's death." Sir Edmund stood. "Your Honor, we would like Mr. Book Bradley's testimony to be heard before any custody determinations are made." Judge Ashworth nodded. "Mr. BABS Bradley, please proceed." Thomas took a deep breath and began the account he had been rehearsing for weeks. "On the morning of Prince Alexander's death, I discovered that someone had tampered with his saddle. The girth strap had been deliberately weakened in a way that would cause the saddle to slip during fast riding." The revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. Charlotte gasped audibly, while Camilla remained rigidly still. "Why didn't you report this immediately?" Judge Ashworth asked. "I was told by certain palace officials that revealing this information would only cause more pain for the royal family and might create security concerns. I was convinced that keeping quiet was in everyone's best interest." Thomas's voice grew stronger as he continued. But I can't remain silent while Princess Elena's custody is being decided. If someone killed her father, she may not be safe with certain members of the royal household. Queen Dowager Camilla's attorney stood immediately. Your Honor, this is highly irregular and based on unsubstantiated accusations. Mr. Bradley has no evidence to support claims of murder, and his testimony appears to be motivated by, I have evidence, Thomas interrupted firmly. He produced a small plastic bag containing leather fragments. I saved pieces of the tampered girth strap. Any forensic expert can confirm that the damage was deliberately inflicted. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Charlotte looked as if she might faint, while James felt his worst fears being confirmed. Judge Ashworth called for a brief recess to allow the legal teams to consult, but as the participants filed out, a commotion erupted in the corridor outside. Princess Elena had somehow escaped from her nanny and was running toward the courtroom, her face streaked with tears. "Mama!" Elena cried, throwing herself into Charlotte's arms. "I heard them talking. They said someone hurt Papa, and they want to take me away from you." Charlotte held her daughter tightly, her own tears flowing freely. "Elena, darling, how did you get here?" "I told Nanny Margaret that I needed to go to the library, but I came here instead. I had to tell them something important." Elena looked around at all the serious adult faces surrounding her. "I know something about Papa's accident." Dr. Mitchell knelt down to Elena's level. "What do you know, sweetheart?" Elena wiped her nose with the back of her hand and spoke with the earnest clarity of a child determined to be heard. "The day Papa died, I saw someone in the stables who wasn't supposed to be there. I was looking for Papa to show him my drawing, and I saw Uncle Philip talking to someone by Thunderbolt's stall." Prince Frederick stepped forward, his face pale. "Elena, are you sure it was Uncle Philip?" Elena nodded vigorously. "He was talking to a man I didn't know, and they were doing something to Papa's saddle. When they saw me, Uncle Philip said I shouldn't tell anyone because it was a surprise for Papa." The adults exchanged horrified glances. Dr. Philip Carrington, the child psychologist who had been supporting Queen Dowager Camilla's custody petition, had been in the stables tampering with Alexander's equipment. "Where is Dr. Carrington now?" James asked urgently. "He left the palace early this morning," came a voice from behind them. Lady Margaret Thornfield approached the group, her face grave. "He said he had been called away on an emergency, but his office told me no such emergency existed." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Carrington had been involved in Prince Alexander's death, and his support for Camilla's custody petition hadn't been motivated by concern for Elena's welfare. It had been an attempt to gain access to the child who had witnessed his crime. Judge Ashworth recalled the hearing to order, and this time, Queen Dowager Camilla's composure had cracked. The revelation that she had unknowingly allied herself with her son's killer in an attempt to gain custody of her granddaughter had shattered her confidence in her own judgment. "Your Honor," Sir Edmund said, "in light of these revelations, we respectfully submit that Princess Elena's safety requires her to remain with her mother, who has been protecting her from danger that others in the royal household were unaware of." Queen Dowager Camilla stood slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your Honor, I withdraw my petition for custody. I see now that I was gravely mistaken about both Charlotte's fitness as a mother and Elena's best interests." She turned to face Charlotte and Elena, her eyes filled with tears and regret. "Charlotte, my dear, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express. You were protecting Elena all along while I was unknowingly putting her in danger." Charlotte, still holding Elena in her arms, looked at her mother-in-law with a mixture of forgiveness and relief. "Camilla, we both want what's best for Elena. Perhaps we can work together to ensure her safety and happiness." Elena looked up at her grandmother with the innocent wisdom of a child who had seen too much adult conflict. "Grandmama, will you help Mama take care of me? I need both of you." The hearing concluded with immediate arrangements for Dr. Carrington's arrest and a full investigation into Prince Alexander's murder. Elena would remain with her mother, but with the understanding that the entire royal family would work together to provide the support and protection she needed. As they left the courthouse, Elena walked between her mother and grandmother, holding both their hands. "Mama," she said thoughtfully, I think Papa would be happy that we're all together now. Charlotte squeezed her daughter's hand and smiled through her tears. I think you're right, darling. I think he would be very happy indeed. The custody battle was over, but the healing process for the royal family had only just begun. Elena had her mother, her grandmother had learned the value of listening rather than assuming, and the truth about Prince Alexander's death would finally be revealed. Captain James Hartwell walked beside them, his loyalty to the royal family stronger than ever, knowing that sometimes protecting the crown meant protecting it from itself. The little princess skipping between the two women who loved her most was safe, and that was all that truly mattered. In the distance, palace staff were already working to repair the relationships and trust that had been damaged during the crisis. The kingdom of Valdoria would emerge stronger from this trial, with a renewed commitment to putting family and truth above protocol and appearances. Princess Elena's future was secure, not because she would inherit a crown, but because she was surrounded by people who had learned to put her welfare above all else, just as Prince Alexander would have wanted.